At the rising of the sun and at its going down, we'll remember him. At the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we'll remember him. At the opening of the buds and in the rebirth of spring, we'll remember him. At the shining of the sun and in the warmth of summer, we'll remember him. At the rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we'll remember him. At the beginning of the year and at its end, we'll remember him. As long as we live, he too shall live, for he is now a part of us as we remember him. When we are weary and in need of strength, we'll remember him. When we are lost or sick at heart, we'll remember him. When we have joy we crave to share, we'll remember him. When we have decisions that are difficult to make, we'll remember him. When we have achievements that are based on his, we'll remember him. As long as we live, he too shall live, for he is now a part of us as we remember him. There is a prayer that Jews recite 3 times daily, known as the Amidah. This is in many ways our most significant prayer, containing within it the essence of our personal and collective aspirations. And it begins with a peculiar line, always recited silently, taken from Psalm 51. Adonai sfatai tiftach ufi yagid tehilatecha. Lord, open my lips, that my words might speak your praise. This phrase is actually a prayer that we be able to pray. For Judaism is a faith that emphasizes the significance of each word and considers each word uttered with perfect authenticity a prayer. Each breath is a prayer. Each utterance, if authentic, is an expression of our godliness. Each sentence, if it comes from the soul, is testimony to the wonder of being alive, of the miracles that God has given us. Mel Allen's life was one long, extended, exhaustive, exhilarating, triumphant prayer. It was a call to all of us to see the sublimity in the smallest things, the pitch 1 inch off the corner, the stolen sign, the first seasonal shifts of the wind. And as for the larger things, he coined the most sublime expression of wonder of them all, radical amazement in 3 short words. How about that? To have lived, to have been able to witness something worth a how about that, that to him was a gift. Whether it was a triple play or a mammoth clout, with those 3 words, Mel Allen was able to elevate broadcasting to the realm of prayer, not just for him, but for the millions who clung to every word he spoke. And he was so fortunate, and he knew it, to have seen Garrick and Ruth, to have chronicled the heroic deeds of Mantle and DiMaggio, to have placed the imprint of the Bard on Don Larson's moment, to have helped us all to say week after week, night after night, how about that? Mel Allen was a good, humble, and sensitive man. He was a loving son who took care of his parents in their old age. Only through his sensitivity with language, he led his parents to believe that they were moving up here from Alabama to help him. When his father was ill, he said to them, "I need you to make a home for me up here. Such exquisite sensitivity. And after they passed on, they continued to be in his thoughts. Every year at our memorial service in the cemetery next door, Mel would be there, with Esther, of course, to remember. We mourn today with Esther, with Larry, Mel's beloved siblings, and Margie. We mourn with the nieces and nephews, Bill, Risa, and Bob, Andrew and Carolyn and Jeffrey. We mourn with Aaron and Anna, Mel's grandniece and grandnephew. He was as a father and grandfather to them. The caring was unbounded, and the devotion, especially to Esther, with whom he lived during the latter years of his life. When Esther's beloved husband Daniel passed away, Mel encouraged her to take all the time she needed to grieve, but then added, "When the time has come for you to come home, home is with me." And Larry, who carries so many of Mel's mannerisms, was a right hand to his brother, once even in a very literal sense. One day when Mel was honored at Yankee Stadium, he had to go down to the field, so he handed the mic to Larry and said, "Here, you take over." And Larry did so effortlessly and as smoothly as his brother. Imagine the kindness of this man, a man in a position to be overpowering and cruel and to get away with it, but not Mel Allen. He understood the sheer miracle of his good fortune in life and recognized the power of his words. Imagine, his was a voice that spoke so many millions of words, so many millions, heard by so many millions of people, yet how few of those words were spoken in anger or bitterness. How few shaming another person. How few containing the gossip that poisons today's vernacular. And how many simple words of wonder and praise. It was as if every time he sat in front of a microphone or otherwise opened his mouth, he uttered that line from Psalm 51, "Lord, open my lips so that my words might speak your praise." Mel would probably be laughing right now because of his humility. And he never spoke of death, never really prepared himself or us for this moment. He wouldn't have wanted us to make such a big deal about his accomplishments. We're talking about a man who in grammar school was allowed to skip a grade midway through the year and never thought to tell his parents about it. But with all due respect to his humility, we must speak his praise. Bert Parks once called Mel Allen the nicest man in the whole industry. Not long ago, Walter Cronkite telephoned him at home when Mel was sick, and that call really touched him. When the two had been at the same network years, decades before, they had hardly ever conversed, but Walter wanted to thank him, decades after the fact, for being so kind in showing him around the studio when he was just starting out. In the 50s, when Mel was at the height of his career, he received a call from an assistant football coach in the Midwest who had some interest in being a sportscaster. Mel Allen spent over an hour with this young man on the phone and left a lasting impression. It was only years later that George Steinbrenner reminded him of the incident. His kindness went beyond normal expectations. As a teacher in Alabama, he once gave a failing grade to Bear Bryant, but he did it nicely. And in his 20s, Mel Allen actually decked someone, a Klansman. He beat the tar out of him, and then years later, he found out that the guy had moved up to Connecticut, so Mel called him and said, "You want another licking?" The man couldn't remember who it was, so Mel took him to lunch. It says in Proverbs, if your enemy be hungry, give him bread to eat. Mel had this knack, this talent of making of every enemy a friend. When we think of Mel Allen, it will be with that microphone in front of him. But let us first recall the kind words that always came out of his mouth, the mouth that spoke into that mic. He achieved greatness through hard work and good fortune and genuine talent, never through malice, deceit, or backstabbing. He achieved every honor imaginable. He is a resident of several halls of fame, but it didn't change him one bit. And when we think of Mel, inevitably we'll think of his impact on baseball. Undoubtedly, some of you are mourning here today, not only for the loss. We felt, foolishly perhaps, that as long as Mel was with us, maybe we could regain that lost youth, that passion, that innocence. But alas, we cannot. The man who coined the name Joltin' Joe has left and gone away. Baseball's era of gentility lies before us. Esther and Larry and the rest of the family wanted all of you to be here. They recognized that their private grief must be shared because the grief that we all feel for different reasons is equally profound, and because Mel truly loved the people whom he served. We are here to mourn the silencing of that voice. A journalist once called him the Homer of Homers. Now that can be taken in many ways, but the intention was to designate Mel as the Homeric poet of the home run. His magnificent descriptive talents were on display, especially when the drama hit its heights. And this gift was matched perfectly with a team and a time that immortalized him as he immortalized them. Another journalist once exclaimed that his voice had been decorated by a florist. I can see that. It resonated, but with class, with style, with a combination of Southern grace and Jewish irony, and that fabulous sense of humor that was both Southern and Jewish. Night after night, October after October, Mel Allen composed the epic poem of baseball's Homeric age, and for that he'll live on long after most of the heroes he described have faded from memory. Most who knew Mel knew that his passion for his work was unquenchable. He never really stopped working. Just over the past several days, he was making preparations to return to this week in baseball. Through an illness that would have stopped lesser men, I saw Mel struggling and at times doubting it all, but never willing to give in to it. For him, giving up his work and his game would have meant giving in. He didn't keep working for ego or for status. Undoubtedly, it gave him appreciation, it gave him satisfaction to be appreciated. It would for us all. But I know how much it meant for him simply to be part of the Yankee family. I know that he didn't do this for the glory. I know how much it meant to him to be part of the game he loved, to be working, to be using his voice, for to silence his voice would have been to silence his soul. And now I must make my true confession. My congregants know this already. I am a Red Sox fan. I grew up in the shadow of Fenway, forgive me. I can't help it. Mel knew it too, and we laughed about it. He forgave me. because to him it didn't matter. I discovered this 2 years ago on the eve of the Day of Atonement. One thing I must say about Mel Allen is that above all, he was a committed Jew as well as a compassionate human being, and the two really do go together. His paternal grandfather built the first synagogue in Alabama, and his maternal mother built the first synagogue in Alabama, and his maternal grandfather was a religious leader. His family tree includes Shmuel Levine, the first Jew to sit in the Russian Duma, and the great Jewish historian Simon Dubnow. And Mel Allen loved this synagogue. He was part of this congregation for decades. And every year, like clockwork, no matter how sick he was, he stood on this pulpit at the beginning of Yom Kippur and held a sacred Torah scroll during the Kol Nidre prayer. This ritual meant so much to him that I can recall him once virtually getting up out of a hospital bed to be here on that holy night. His presence meant so much to my congregation too, for we knew that with his help, our prayers would have a far better chance of making it over the wall, gone. And every year, Mel and I would see each other before the service began, and we'd exchange a few words of greeting. Well, 2 years ago, just hours prior to Yom Kippur, baseball officially canceled the World Series for the first time in Mel's lifetime. Everywhere, people were in deep mourning. How could it be the fall without the Fall Classic? Where would our heroes come from? What would become of our nation without our national pastime? The baseball world, the country, and the calendar were entering an autumnal abyss. I wasn't sure what to say to Mel that evening. I wanted to comfort him in the hope that he could comfort me. So I said to him, "Such a sad day." And Mel, in his matter-of-fact way, which could often mask deep wisdom as plain common sense, replied, "This is not a tragedy. War, now that's tragic. Poverty and hunger, that's a tragedy. This is not a tragedy." And I ascended the pulpit that night a whole lot wiser. Mr. Baseball, the one I had thought lived and breathed only for the game, made me understand that it was just a game which lived and breathed through him, but only inasmuch as it expressed the drama, beauty, and poetry of life. It wasn't the game that mattered, it was the living and the breathing. It was on that night that the voice of the Yankees enabled this Red Sox fan to understand that ultimately we are all on the same team. Mr. Baseball had his priorities straight. So while he will best be remembered for his association with the sport, and while one of his final activities was watching the Yankees win on Sunday, let us never forget the lesson he taught me that night. Let us mourn today not because baseball has severed its final tie to innocence, but because the human race has lost a voice that brought us closer to one another and closer to God. And let us celebrate today too. For Mel's voice, which was his essence, which became the essence of his sport, will never be silenced. The Lord opened his mouth, his words spoke God's praise, and these words will reverberate unto eternity. May that voice continue to resonate through the heavens and through our souls, and may his gentle spirit be bound up in the web of life. And let us all say, Amen. I call upon Rabbi Alex Gold.
I grew up in Chicago. I went to Webster School, 33rd and Wentworth, 2 blocks from Comiskey Park. I was an avid White Sox fan, and Mel loved me more for that.
And crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea.
Done a lot of PR with Mel. I used to work for the Yankees in public relations, and we go everywhere, and they just fell in love with him because he was so real. He treated everybody the same, and that's the way he was on and off the field. He was just a regular guy, and he never took his stardom and put it out to anybody. You know, he just showed everybody the way the real person that he was growing up and wherever. You know, he's a nice gentleman.
It sounded like it surprises you after you listen to a guy, you have a certain image of somebody, and then he was just that way?
Well, he was always been that way since I've known him. Since I first came up to Major Leagues, he took a liking. I took a liking to him right away. He was so honest, and he always got the honesty from him. He was fun. He joked a lot. He'd tell you a lot of stories about the past, and Banjo, and the Garricks, and the Roots, and it was a great thing to listen to. Coming up as young ball players, seeing these guys play, you know. And Mel Allen was a great person, and as I said, we did a lot of PR work the last 3 years together, and he was a gentleman, and I'll always remember him that way.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
George is at the cemetery. He'll be coming back.
Memories like if you were around. Yeah. I would think the world's through. Yeah. What number? 78?